fearless leader of the X-Men, Cyclops, joins Marvel Rivals in Season 8.5 as a ranged duelist. Cyclops is a bunker buster and priority target finisher. His playstyle is going to revolve around forcing the enemy team to separate from each other because his grouped up damage potential is just way too high. Then, once the team is separated, he can work with his allies to take out isolated targets. He has great options to finish up those targets, and he can take out people from around corners. As a hitscan style character, he has an insanely high skill ceiling, but his skill floor is actually quite high as well, which means regardless of your skill level, you can hop on Cyclops and have a good time. But as you master this character, your output is going to go through the roof. Playing him in the games, I definitely felt rather unstoppable. The amount of damage I was able to push out into the enemy team forced them to constantly be giving space to my team, and then allowed me to take people out for around corners and be a sneaky trick shot style character. His whole theme is based around ricocheting shots, and if you can get good at the trigonometry required, this character is crazy. We're going to go over what each of his different abilities do and talk about the mindset and playstyle that you should be establishing while you're using these moves. Then we're going to go into the full kind of breakdown of what you should be doing when you're playing Cyclops in your matches. Starting all off, his basic attack is Optic Blast. It is a 4 pulse in a very short amount of time hitscan style attack. It does a decent chunk of damage, keeping up with most of the other hitscan style characters, but it does have a slightly lower rate of fire. It is capable of doing headshots, which of course will deal double damage if you manage to land them. And he does have to reload his eyes, forcing himself to do a deep blink after 8 shots. The fall off of Optic Blast begins at about 20 meters, and goes down to about 65% damage at 60 meters. 65% of the damage is really solid for that amount of distance away, and you can do some major pain to the enemy team, keeping yourself plenty safe. Concussive Beam is his alternate fire. When he activates this, he's going to do a channeled attack with 100 energy, draining 5 energy per second. The channeled attack will deal constant damage to any target that he's hitting, and then ricochet over to nearby enemies. If you don't hit any players and instead hit the ground, it will then do a bouncing arc. If you can make the arc hit a player, it will then chain to all other players in the area, but it'll have reduced damage. Every target beyond the first takes reduced damage, and if you hit a surface, the damage is reduced further. The resource for this generates slowly over time and does not automatically fully refresh upon a reload. So while you're playing the character, you're going to be burning through your I-beams, and then you're going to have to wait to build them back up, going back to your primary fire or other abilities. Concussive Beam's range is 20 meters. Beyond that, you're not going to be able to deal any damage to targets unless you ricochet it off the ground. It'll reflect infinitely from any distance that you manage to hit if you hit the ground, but you do have to get that ricochet to then hit a player to make it effective. If there's a player within the angle of the ricochet distance, it will home in on them to a certain extent, but you have to make sure that they're in the angled path. If you land the shot beside a target, it will not bounce over to them and has to be in their frontal cone. Because this attack ricochets between all targets, in combat you're going to be using this to force enemies to separate. Beaming into the enemy tanks chains the damage around and causes so much damage to the enemy team, they're not going to be able to sustain through it. And that's going to force them to find areas to break line of sight. Once around corners is your specialty, and you're going to be able to bounce around attacks to vulnerable targets, helping your allies take them out. Because the base distance of this is 20 meters, you do have to be in a relatively unsafe position to get the maximum out of your concussive beams. You're going to have to trade off between using that and staying at a distance using your Optic Blast. Beam is stronger, Blast is safer. If at any time you're airborne as Cyclops, use your secondary fire Concussive Beam, you will begin slow falling, essentially using the intense force of your beam to stop yourself from descending. This can give you some cool moments, as we saw in the trailer where he bounced over Doctor Strange and took out the targets behind him. It does put you in an extremely vulnerable and easy to hit position. The slow fall is very slow, and you're really going to be a sitting duck up there, so don't use it too often or too predictably. He has a melee strike of 3 karate chops. This actually does pretty decent damage at a good rate of fire, but there's not a huge amount of uses for this because the ricochet shot and other abilities in his kit are just going to come out better in almost every situation, V on PC or right analog stick down on controller to be able to do some extra damage to nearby foes. Landing either your primary or secondary fire on targets also reduces the cooldown of your Ricochet Force E ability. Upon activation, he's going to blast out a quick Optic Blast, hitting a target and then ricocheting to all nearby enemies. This special attack has 2 charges with a delayed cooldown between uses. The damage output this is pretty decent if you do manage to land it on a target, but if you miss and hit a surface, it's still going to ricochet and hit targets, but for about half the damage. This move is generally your finisher. When targets are looking particularly low, you're going to unleash this blast to do a good burst and take them out. Or if they've managed to just sneak around a corner with a sliver of health, blast it up against the wall that they got around, and you'll be able to secure a kill nobody else would. Each activation of Ricochet Force also gives you 25 bonus HP. It's not a lot, but it is a little bit to work with and can give you a little bit of extra safety when you're being focused in on. This is one of the primary ways that he can use to duel with enemies. Blasting out a basic attack into Ricochet Burst then gives him 25 HP to be able to work with as he continues fighting the enemy before getting another Ricochet Burst to hopefully take them down. Now, Psych's damage output is not his only selling feature. He also has some pretty insane mobility options. Propulsion Burst is his main utility ability. Activating left shift, he'll do a blast forward, hitting the target in front of him, knocking them back, and knocking himself away from them. This will give him about 30 meters of knockback distance if held down, or will bounce him about 10 meters if you just tap it. The longer you hold it, the more damage you deal to targets that you manage to keep your cursor on, as well as the further you're going to go. The knockback from this is based off of where the surface that you hit is. So if you look downwards and activate it, you'll be knocked upwards in the air, and you can use this for all sorts of movement shenanigans. In addition to this, as long as you're channeling it, you can use your movement to dash left or right throughout the channel. The camera does move as you're doing this, so it can be a little bit trickier to keep your damage onto the target, but it's mostly used for safety and quick juking out of the line of danger. While you are airborne, you can still use your propulsion to quickly burst yourself to the side if enemies get focused in on you, and then continue to dish out the damage. Along with this, you have Optic Ascent, your F ability. This extra ability, when activated, will launch you up into the air, and will do a decent chunk of damage and an interesting knockback to any players that you do manage to hit with it, but it's really hard to land. For the most part, you're going to be using this as a panic button when enemies get on top of you, or as a way to give yourself a good vantage point on the fight. Great for hopping yourself up to higher terrain, or bouncing yourself up in the air so you can finish off a target you wouldn't have been able to keep your cursor on. If you need some crazy distance, you can combine both of these, first launching yourself up into the air, and then blasting yourself backwards to gain some serious distance. Both these abilities technically have a bunny hop, though it's way easier to activate on Propulsion Beam. At the end of the arc, if you do another jump, you will do a tiny little hop. This gives you about 5 more meters of distance, and can really get you to safety or back into combat significantly faster. Psych re-enters the fray quite quickly because of this. You can come out of the spawn room, launch yourself up into the air, blast yourself backwards, and bunny hop over terrain to get yourself back into the action before your enemy players are ready for you. Your ultimate ability is Ruby Rage. Activating your ultimate gives you a confirm cancel dialogue and a red beam. Canceling will just go back to your regular form, but confirming will do a 2-part attack. First, you're going to blast the area with an optic beam, doing damage to any targets in a line in front of you. It'll then create this tectonic eruption plate area, and after a delay, that area will erupt for some massive damage. The initial hit of this is not particularly strong, and it's really the follow-up explosion where the damage comes from. But if you manage to land both on a target, you're going to kill anything under 325 HP, no problem. And you're going to be able to nuke down tanks to about 10 to 15% of their maximum health, as well as destroy anything like shields or Groot walls before doing that damage output. This is really one of the big reasons why he's a bunker buster. If the enemy team is hunkered down and really hard to be able to deal with, you can come in with a massive Ruby Rage, destroying their tank line and making it really easy for your team to mop them up. Because of his mobility, there's a lot of cool options with this where you can quickly dash around the battlefield, coming in an unexpected angle before unleashing a Ruby Rage. The simplest is just launching yourself up into the air and then unleashing it onto the entire battlefield, but you can do some other things like a quick propulsion beam to be able to zigzag behind the enemy team and unleash it from their backline. Or if something cool has happened around a corner, you can use your propulsion beam to zip over to a good angle and get the shot off with your team. Psych combos extremely well with characters like Groot or anybody else that can lock down enemy teams, leaving them vulnerable to that full optic combo. As a leader-like character should, Psych flourishes if you are able to play him in a very collaborative environment. Working together with your teammates, he shores up the weaknesses of other players and can get some insane benefit if players can help him get the most out of his kit. Ruby Rage will not kill strategists out of their support ultimates. If any of the healing over time ults are down and you're to use Ruby Rage on targets within them, it is not going to do enough damage between the initial burst and then the explosion to successfully kill any targets. Now, if you're able to get a damage boost like a rocket ult, this might change and you can do some insane damage to grouped up enemies, and again, that all comes to the coordination of this character. Playing with characters like Storm or Rocket can really give him the oomph that he needs to be even more threatening on the battlefield. Overall, Cyclops is an insanely fun character. He's great to get on no matter your skill level and feels rewarding at every difficulty. His damage output is rather slow and he's not a good dueler. If the enemy is focused in on you and you alone, it can often be easy for them to be able to take you out because of how much slower it is for you to kill targets. Unless of course you can get that easy 2-tap headshot and get a quick kill before they're even ready for you. But most of us outside of those celestial lobbies are not going to be landing those often enough to call him a great dueler. Alright, so in your games, you're going to stay out quite a bit closer to your vanguards than you probably would on the average duelist. Cyclops delivers a lot of close range threat because of his bouncing concussive force, and so you can do threat to incoming targets and tanks, as well as be able to push that extra damage into vulnerable and isolated targets with the hit scan whenever you see an opportunity to do so. And you need to be pivoting your focus back and forth between pressuring people that have poked their heads out while doing massive damage to targets that are nearby. Always be ready to use both your Propulsion Blast as well as your Ascent to quickly get away from threats and move around the battlefield quickly to stop people from keeping their curses on you. It's your duty to keep yourself alive, especially because of how close to this action you're going to be. Dish out as much damage you can into vanguards whenever the enemy team is not going to be ready for that kind of output, but don't just pour too much damage into them because you're just going to be powering up enemy ultimates. Think about who is currently vulnerable and where your team's damage is going to be able to focus in on, and then use your beams to help organize that damage into the priority targets. Stay mobile and dash back and forth constantly. Don't stay too still because that's going to allow players to keep on you easier. Keep a constant vigilance looking around the battlefield for any target whose HP has started to get low. Once you see a health bar nearing death, you can do a quick pivot over and blast out a ricocheting shot to get a kill secure. Or doing quick flicks into hit scan hits is going to pressure duelists and healers, stopping them from being able to focus in on your own team. You should be supporting your team as Cyclops. He is so very good in that aspect, and you need to be thinking about what your team currently needs from you rather than thinking so much about how you're going to get your current kill. Tracking the energy charge of your concussive beam, as well as the cooldowns of all your mobility, is really key, and one of those skill sets that's really going to raise you up above other Cyclopses. Many are going to burn themselves out way too early in the fight and have no cooldowns available to keep themselves threatening. You need to manage what you're doing and make sure you're not just wasting your cooldowns and abilities in moments that aren't going to secure your team any kind of advantage. Because of your ricocheting effects, you can be really good in just shutting down dives. Your ability to get a little bit of chunk damage on those fast moving characters by just zipping around with some ricocheting shots really makes it so that they can't stay as safe as they'd like to and will put them into situations that they're much more likely to be taken down. Although your ricocheting effects aren't going to do great against flyers because they're constantly out of harm's way, you're going to be able to use your hit scan potential against those targets to be able to constantly force them down towards the ground where they're way more vulnerable. If you're going to go for a channeled beam on enemies, always make sure that there's somebody between you and the enemy forces. You are a squishy duelist with 275 HP, and if enemies do turn their focus in on you and you were not ready for that, you're going to hit the pavement. It's going to be really common as you're learning Cyclops that you stay too close to the enemies because you're trying to get the most you can out of your channeled attack, and you just become too vulnerable and easy to be taken down. But it's also going to be common for some Cyclopses to never really get into the action and only utilize half their kit of their hit scan blasts. The ebb and flows of the fight is something you have to feel as this character to really get the most out of him that you can. You need to be able to identify when is the right time to switch between hit scan and group damage and how to get the right pressure into the enemy team. Forcing out big group damage when multiple targets are clumped up is then going to force enemy healers to come out of their safety bubbles and get into vulnerable positions. Then quickly change your focus over to them and dish out some devastating damage out to them. If they aren't ready for that, you should be able to take them down in a couple of quick taps or force them out of line of sight, going back to your channel damage into the beefy frontliners while they have none of their supports focused any longer. Your ultimate 60-meter range means that you can stay pretty far back and get it off. I see a lot of Cyclopses already even just charging in at the enemy team when they're ready to get their ult off, getting way too close and then trying to pop this ability and just getting annihilated before it becomes valuable, or making it far too obvious that they're going to get this effect off. You could be quite a distance away, blast out that effect, and it's all hit scan, so it's just going to immediately erupt damage and explode for huge burst. Instead of charging the enemy team, try and find a good angle where they won't see you quickly coming out, and then get huge area effects effects off critical choke points. Cyc specializes in things like domination and cart control, where players are going to be forced to be grouped up in small areas. He's really going to struggle in areas where enemy team can stay more spread out and you can't get all that ricochet damage, instead relying on simple bursts of your Optic Blast. Not insignificant damage, but not your top potential. I hope with this guide you have a better understanding of how to play Cyclops and what mentality you should have around playing the character and utilizing the skills. I'm Zesty Fresh with Summers AKA Cyclops, and we'll catch you guys next time. Suzaze.